the most disturbing mysteries that have left researchers completely stumped for decades. You know, at this point in YouTube history, I think everybody has watched at least one video about unsolved mysteries. And while these videos are interesting, usually if you've seen one, you've seen them all. Typically, the entries are rather surface level, covering the same old cases that everyone knows about. Fortunately, this video is different. We're going to cover mysteries that are so bizarre and so inexplicable that even the most dedicated researchers have thrown up their hands in defeat. Oh yeah, and this list gets more disturbing as it goes on. Let's begin. Before we get into the craziest entries on this list, I want to make something clear. These aren't your typical missing person cases or standard murder mysteries. These are situations that have left scientists, investigators, and medical professionals genuinely confused about what they witnessed. We're talking about events that seem to defy the laws of physics, biology, and common sense. And the scariest part is that despite decades of investigation and modern technology, we're no closer to understanding what actually happened. The Dyatlov Pass incident. If you thought regular hiking accidents were scary, then you would be correct. But this isn't just a regular hiking accident. This video is about mysteries that have never been solved, and this case is way more disturbing than any standard wilderness tragedy. In fact, I think a good name for this would be the ultimate unsolved mystery. But in case you're unfamiliar with what happened, let me break it down for you. Picture this. The year is 1959, and you're part of a group of experienced Soviet college students embarking on what should be a routine ski expedition through the Ural Mountains. You're led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student who's planned this trip meticulously. Everything seems normal until it isn't. What happened next would become one of the most investigated and least understood mysteries of the 20th century. The 9 hikers never returned from their expedition. When search teams finally located their campsite, they discovered something that made absolutely no sense. The tent had been cut open from the inside, and all 9 hikers had fled into the freezing wilderness, many of them barefoot and inadequately clothed. In temperatures reaching negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, they abandoned their shelter and ran into life-threatening conditions. But here's where it gets really weird. When investigators finally found the bodies, the injuries they discovered were unlike anything they had seen before. 3 of the hikers had suffered massive trauma that looked like they had been in a severe impact incident. One man had a significantly fractured skull, while 2 others had their rib cages badly compressed, as if some extreme force had acted on them. The medical examiner stated that the force required to cause these injuries would be impossible for a human to generate. To make things even more bizarre, some of the clothing tested positive for radiation, and several victims had what witnesses described as an unusual orange tan on their skin. The official investigation concluded that the hikers died from a compelling natural force, which is basically the Soviet equivalent of saying they had no idea what happened. Decades later, researchers are still trying to figure out what could have caused 9 experienced hikers to flee their only shelter in deadly conditions and suffer injuries that seem physically impossible. Recent theories have ranged from delayed avalanches to military experiments to infrasound phenomena that can cause panic in humans. But here's the problem with every single theory. None of them can explain all the evidence. The avalanche theory doesn't account for the radiation or the specific pattern of injuries. The military theory doesn't explain why the government would allow such extensive investigation if they were covering something up. And the infrasound theory, while interesting, doesn't explain the physical trauma found on the bodies. What makes this case particularly haunting is that we have extensive documentation. The hikers kept detailed diaries and took photographs throughout their journey. The last photos on their cameras show the group setting up camp in what appears to be normal winter conditions. Then something happened that was so terrifying, so immediate that it caused 9 rational adults to cut their way out of their only shelter and run to their deaths in sub-zero temperatures. The Sadr children disappearance. Moving from the frozen mountains of Russia to small-town America, we have a mystery that has tormented one family for nearly 8 decades. On Christmas Eve, 1945, the Sadr family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, was consumed by fire. What should have been a tragic but straightforward house fire became one of America's most perplexing missing persons cases. George and Jenny Sadr managed to escape the blaze, with 4 of their 10 children, but 5 children were missing and presumed dead in the fire. Here's where the mystery begins. Despite the house burning completely to the ground, no human remains were ever found. Not a single bone fragment, tooth, or any trace of the 5 missing children. This is widely considered physically impossible. Even in intense fires, bone fragments and teeth generally survive, because they require temperatures far exceeding what a typical house fire can produce. The circumstances surrounding the fire were suspicious from the beginning. The family's phone lines had been cut, their truck wouldn't start despite working fine the day before, and the ladder they kept outside for emergencies had mysteriously vanished. When the fire department finally arrived, they found that the water in their trucks had frozen solid, making their response completely ineffective. But the story gets stranger. In the days and weeks following the fire, multiple witnesses reported seeing the missing children in the company of strangers, both before and after the fire. A woman claimed she served breakfast to the children and several adults at a restaurant 50 miles away, the morning after the fire. A motel owner reported seeing the children with foreign-speaking adults. These sightings continued for years, always just credible enough to keep hope alive, but never concrete enough to provide answers. The Sodders spent the rest of their lives investigating their children's disappearance, hiring private detectives and following every lead. In 1967, 22 years after the fire, they received a mysterious photograph in the mail showing a young man who resembled their missing son, Louis. On the back was written a cryptic message, but when they hired a detective to investigate, he disappeared without a trace, taking their money and leaving no forwarding address. What makes this case particularly devastating is the complete absence of closure. The family lived with the agonizing possibility that their children were alive somewhere, taken by unknown individuals for unknown reasons. The physical impossibility of 5 bodies completely disappearing in a house fire suggests that the children were removed before the blaze, but by whom and why remains completely unknown. The investigation revealed details that only deepened the mystery. George Sodder had been receiving threatening phone calls in the months leading up to the fire from someone who warned him that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be harmed. He had also been approached by 2 separate men trying to sell him life insurance, both of whom made ominous comments about his house and family. When George refused their services, one of the men told him his house would burn down and he would lose his children. Even more disturbing, a bus driver later admitted that he had seen fiery objects being thrown onto the Sodder house roof, contradicting the official story of an electrical fire. The fire chief, who was also the town's coroner, refused to allow the scene to be properly investigated and cleared the site before a thorough search could be conducted. When the family later excavated the site themselves, they found small bone fragments that an expert determined belonged to someone who had died at a much older age than any of the missing children. The Sodders erected a billboard along the highway, featuring photographs of their missing children, offering a reward for information. The sign stood for decades, becoming a haunting reminder of a family's desperate search for answers that would never come. What happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennings, and Betty Sodder remains one of America's most baffling disappearances, with theories ranging from kidnapping by organized crime to witness protection gone wrong, but absolutely no concrete evidence to support any explanation. Havana Syndrome. Fast forward to the modern era, and we have a mystery that proves even our advanced medical technology can't explain everything. Starting in 2016, American diplomats and intelligence officers stationed in Havana, Cuba, began experiencing symptoms so bizarre that doctors initially thought they were making them up. What became known as Havana Syndrome has now affected over 1,500 government employees across 96 countries, and medical professionals still have absolutely no idea what's causing it. These mysteries remind us that despite all our technology, all our scientific advances, there are still things in this world that completely defy explanation. From frozen mountains to burning houses to diplomatic compounds, these cases have stumped the brightest minds for decades. Maybe that's what makes them so terrifying, the idea that some questions might never have answers. If you enjoyed diving into these unsolved cases, let me know in the comments which mystery disturbed you the most, and as always,